My name is Anavash. This year, OFI decided to use the global MPI results to highlight the situation of children. Children are one of the main victims of poverty. The impact of poverty on children tends to be magnified because enduring poverty spells during childhood can have very negative impacts on children's development. Traditionally, children's poverty has been assessed based on income or expenditure. A child would be considered poor if she lived in a household with an income or an expenditure below a certain level. However, this metric alone might not be the best way of looking into children's poverty for several reasons. Among them, the household's resources might not be shared equally among household members. And also, children's development requires some goods and services that might not be purchased. Thus, we think that a multidimensional measure of children's poverty can highly contribute to understanding this phenomenon. With the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, the international community affirmed the importance of eradicating child poverty, identifying within goal number 1 the need to reduce the proportion of men, women, and children living in multidimensional poverty. The Alkire and Foster methodology has become one of the standard techniques to measure multidimensional poverty. There are two different ways of applying this methodology to assess children's poverty. The first approach is to decompose or disaggregate a household-based measure like the global MPI by age groups. By applying the property of subgroup decomposability, we can obtain the incidence, intensity, and the MPI among children. The assumption here is that a child is poor if he or she lives in an MPI poor household. The second approach is to build a child-specific MPI measure, a measure that identifies a child as poor based on the child's achievements instead of their household achievements. This approach is more precise, as allows us to focus on a child as an individual and also consider the deprivations that are specifically relevant for children. However, it's also more challenging because as children grow old, the deprivations that are relevant for their development might also change. Thus, it is difficult to construct a measure that uses age-specific indicators appropriate to compare child poverty status across different age cohorts. However, Bhutan has already done such a measure. They built a national child MPI. The results, the findings I'm sharing here today, however, they are based on the first approach. The starting point is the global MPI, which is a household level measure. What I mean is a measure that identifies poverty at the household level. OFI has disaggregated the 2017 global MPI results by age groups to analyze the particular situation of 1.8 billion children living in the 103 countries covered by this year's results. Although the global MPI is a household level measure, as I mentioned, it includes indicators related to children. It includes indicators of children's achievements, like nutrition and school attendance. It includes indicators that affect children's chances of life chances, like sanitation, safe water, and cooking fuel. And it also includes indicators of household features that may shape children's lives, like child mortality and whether there is a household member with at least 5 years of schooling. So when we disaggregated these results, the first striking finding it is that 37% of children in our sample are MPI poor. This corresponds to 689 million of children using 2013 population figures. We also found that children tend to be overrepresented among the poor. They represent 1/3 of the population in our sample, but almost half of the MPI poor in our sample. Most of the MPI poor children live in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is the result of two factors. First, these two regions house the majority of children in our sample. 57% of children in our sample live in these two regions. But second, these two regions also register the highest, extremely high levels of child poverty incidence. 66% of children in Sub-Saharan Africa are MPI poor, and 50% in South Asia. This means that 1 in every 3 children in Sub-Saharan Africa and 1 in every 2 children in South Asia are MPI poor. Looking at the map plotted in the slide, it represents the world map with the coverage of the global MPI, and the brightest red corresponds to the highest levels of child poverty incidence. You can clearly see that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are like 2 clusters of red. In terms of countries, we also find that 52% of the MPI poor children live only in 4 countries that represent 38% of children population. These countries are India, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. How poor are the children? This graph plots the incidence and the intensity of poverty among children in the different regions. The size of the bubble is proportional to the number of MPI poor children living in that region. So you can see that the bubbles of South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are by far the biggest. Looking along the horizontal axis, the incidence, we confirm that the incidence of poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia is much higher than in the other regions. Looking along the vertical axis, the intensity, we see that Sub-Saharan Africa is the region where children experience poverty with the highest levels of intensity. Here, a poor child is deprived on average on 58% of the indicators. The situation is especially dramatic in Niger, where poor children are deprived on average in close to 70% of the indicators. The second region with the highest levels of intensity of poverty are the Arab states, not South Asia. And this is driven mostly by the situation in 2 countries, Sudan and Somalia. When we look where the MPI poor children live in terms of countries' income category, we see that a little bit over than 2/3 of the MPI poor live in middle-income countries. But we also see that close to 1/3 of the MPI poor lives in low-income countries. And these countries only house 17% of the child in our population. So they are overrepresented. The children in these countries are overrepresented among the poor. And we also found that it's in these low-income countries that we found that children experience the highest levels of poverty, highest incidence, highest intensity. Children are more afflicted by poverty than adults, both in terms of intensity and incidence. 37% of the children are MPI poor. This compares to 21% of the adults. In terms of incidence, on average, poor children in our sample are deprived in 52% of the indicators, which compares to 48% among adults. In all 103 countries, we find that the MPI among children is higher than the MPI among adults. And this difference is statistically significant for 82 of the countries. We found that in 19 countries, representing 41% of our sample of children, the incidence of poverty among children is at least 10 percentage points higher than the incidence of multidimensional poverty among adults. The graph in this slide plots the percentage of individuals who are MPI poor and deprived in each of the indicators. We can see that the percentage, and the light bars refer to children. The bright red or the darker red refers to adults. We can see that this percentage of poor and deprived is always higher among children than adults for all the 10 indicators. We can also see that more than 25% of the children in our sample are poor and deprived in at least three, they are poor and deprived in 3 indicators. These are cooking fuel, sanitation, and flooring. Finally, looking at we disaggregate the global MPI by different children age groups. And what we found is that young children younger than 10 years old are the poorest group according to the MPI. This implies a need for policy action to fight deprivations that set in very early in the childhood and may affect them through all their lives. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.